world's greatest refugee crisis it has forgotten. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the world was in chaos, millions had died, and 60 million had become refugees. Whole countries had been wiped off of the map, swallowed up and renamed. What is often forgotten is what happened next. Because prior to the Second World War, the world had largely been carved up between rival empires of Britain and France and its allies. And in just 6 years, it was going to be divided between the new superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union. Meaning a lot of countries were going to get their independence, and it wasn't going to be a peaceful process. One of the countries to experience the biggest upheavals was India, which for over 2 centuries had been dominated by the British. And when the British agreed to leave in 1948, they did so with only weeks' notice. But part of the chaos was the country was to be split into 2 several countries, India and East and West Pakistan. If these divisions were just geographical, maybe things would have worked out, but they were religious and ethnic, and that would always lead to bloodshed and chaos. It is the world's largest migration till date, but the tragedy was that for many years it was forgotten by the whole world, and most of all in the country of its origin, India. A recent study has put the figure of those who were forced to migrate during the partition of India in 1947 at 20 million, but even that may not do justice to the reality. As people suddenly found themselves strangers in a strange land that had been their homeland only a fortnight again, there were terrible massacres. The total number of dead is figured to have been at least 1 million and maybe several times as much. British and Indian soldiers who tried to supervise the chaos that had been liberating Nazi concentration camps described the scenes of death and misery as similar. But a second group is rarely spoken of by the internal refugees. Those who thought they were in the same country, only they weren't. 20 million Indians and 3 million East and West Pakistanis were to be internally displaced. That is, strangers not in a strange land, but strangers in their own land. But one thing they would have in common with so many refugees was a mistaken belief that they would be able to return home one day. Like so many refugees throughout history, they could just count themselves lucky to be alive. And worse still, those in Western Pakistan would be internally displaced again in the 1970s, as that piece of land ended up being fought over by India and Pakistan and becoming modern-day Bangladesh. Neither in India nor in Pakistan has much effort been made to either care for the refugees, their descendants, or even recognize their suffering. It's a tragic lesson that's repeated today in almost any country that has experienced partition or civil war, such as Congo or Syria, where half the population is estimated to be internally or externally displaced. India and Pakistan both have several museums of partition each to celebrate their independence and celebrate their Independence Days. The problem is that whilst it's really easy to celebrate being free from the stuffy and corrupt British Empire, it's easy to demonize your Pakistani and Indian neighbors. It's hard when it's your own government not taking care of you and your fellow countryman not helping you whilst you're trapped in a displaced persons camp. Right now, there are millions of refugees around the world fleeing conflicts in Ukraine, Congo, and Syria, amongst other nations. But let's not forget those who are internally displaced and are refugees without ever even leaving their home country.